India's future because we know that the talent pool is leading the way for new business and innovation for the region and across the globe. In this room, we have already moved past the theoretical. To build trust across the tech stack, we need to acknowledge the role of both developers who build the models and deployers who use them. JP Chase, as a leading deployer, we have over 400 AI use cases in production to manage risk, optimize trade, improve the experience of our customers, and crucially, protect our customers from fraud. We are operating real systems, serving real customers, and managing real risk every day. We have learnt that accountability must be shared and explicit. Creators must own how technology is designed and its limits. Deployers must own how it's applied and the results. Because real people feel the impact of these tools. Builders and deployers must work together to optimize and use AI to enable solutions. That is the only way to build confidence that is required for mass adoption. As we look at the global regulatory environment, it's clear that technology is moving faster than the frameworks around it. This includes governance, coordination, and shared norms across borders and sectors. Based on JP Chase's experience in highly regulated markets, the best approach is to govern for outcomes, not just the technology itself. We should set the bars that matter, treating customers fairly, delivering better outcomes, and maintaining market integrity. While national innovation agendas and sovereign AI strategies are understandable and often necessary, we must ensure they do not lead to fragmentation. Fragmentation slows progress. We need rules that are interoperable across borders so that an innovation developed in India can be trusted and scaled globally. For the Global South, trust is not just a safety measure. It is a key enabler of adoption. If we can close the governance gap between developers and deployers, we can unlock AI's economic potential across all markets. JP Chase is committed to being a responsible leader, modelling safety, transparency, and accountability while deploying at speed and scale. I look forward to this discussion on how we can move beyond general agreement towards shared approaches that actually work in practice, at scale, and across borders. I want to now introduce and pass over to our moderator, Rebecca Finlay, our very good friend and CEO of the Partnership on AI.
Thank you, John. Welcome, everyone. We have a real treat for you this morning because, as John said, we really want to get deep and substantive about the question of trust across the AI value chain and how that is core and essential to adoption and deployment wherever it might happen across borders in the global north or in the global south. So this impressive panel that I'm going to introduce to you are going to be our experts today to talk a little bit about this. Right to my left, I have Denise Wong, who is the Assistant Chief Executive Data Innovation and Protection at the Infocom Media Development Authority, or IMDA, and at the Ministry of Digital Development and Information in Singapore. Hello, Denise. Great to have you with us. Beside Denise, we have Tara Lyons, who is the Global Head of AI Policy at JP Chase, a deeply established leader in the field of AI governance and AI trust, and looking forward to her contributions. And then we have Ria Strasser-Galvis, the International Policy Special Projects Leads at Anthropic. Hello, Ria. Good to have you with us. And Dr. Mankul Saran, co-founder and executive director of AI Safety Asia. Thank you for joining. So before I move to my first question, I wanted to say a little bit about the organization that I lead, which is the Partnership on AI. We are a global nonprofit. We bring together 140 partners in 18 countries. And what's unique about our organization is that we breathe and live multi-stakeholder, cross-sectoral collaboration on the core elements of responsible AI innovation. And so that means we are very honored to have technology companies at the table, technology companies that sit in all sorts of sectors, whether that be financial services like JP Chase, but also civil society organizations and academics at research institutions around the world. And we believe that it is only by creating spaces for these very diverse perspectives to come together that we can solve the real challenges to promote responsible and beneficial AI adoption globally. We have been doing some work on trust across the AI value chain. And later this week, we'll be issuing 2 reports to really scope out for policymakers what does it mean to have a thriving and vibrant assurance ecosystem. I think all of us in this room can agree that without trust, you cannot have innovation. And we want to help policymakers to better understand what it means to have a thriving assurance ecosystem and how to have trust across the value chain. And we had the opportunity to begin to have a deep conversation about this with some of our partners in New York City last week. And we were hosted by JP Morgan Chase to have what we had was an AI enterprise forum. And it was a fascinating discussion with 3 themes that really emerged around AI trust. So the first being that governance of AI is governance. Good governance matters whether it's AI technologies or otherwise, even if there might be some defining characteristics about AI technologies. And we need to integrate governance into all aspects of our operations. The second is that we really need to think about collaborating across the value chain, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. The third is that with AI deployment, we will see changes and evolutions and iterations of the model, so it has to be a dynamic level of risk management, and that does change the parameters of traditional risk management within many organizations. And then finally, we have to be focused on the societal and real-world outcomes of whatever decisions we are making as businesses. So how do we center the human experience? Because at the end of the day, trust is about the trust that our customers have in our products, that our clients have in working with us, and then, of course, that our citizens have in the technologies that they are interacting with every day, whether it be in financial services or with chatbots or in any other way with AI. So with that, I will turn to Denise with my first question. Tell us a little bit. I mean, Singapore has really led the world around many of the work and efforts that you're doing around AI assurance. So let us know how you define trusted AI, and what are some of the policy tools and frameworks that you have put in place to ensure trust across the tech stack.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. And firstly, thank you to JP Morgan Chase for having us. Rebecca, I remember that 2 years ago I attended your partners conference, and we were just beginning to have this conversation on generative AI and what safety and what trust means. And here we are 2 years later. I think we've moved a few steps forward in this conversation. For us as a country, and I think I speak for many countries, it's about giving your citizens the trust and confidence to use the technology, especially in the global south, especially for a small country like Singapore. But it's also about having companies, organizations, big and small, use the technology confidently and creating an environment for them to do so in a way that is safe and trusted, but also gives them space to really use and explore and exploit, because that's what companies should do. So for us in Singapore, it's been about putting in place just the right amount of guardrails, and to be honest, that's still an ongoing conversation about what right is, but then creating those safe spaces where people can take, use, and innovate. As a policymaker, what does that mean? It means you have to be really humble, because we don't know what the answers are. We have to be agile. We have to try and keep up with understanding what the technology is and how it's changing, and we have to put out sort of guidelines and tools that are adaptive, that can be quickly updated, that can be experimental. Concrete has set the same way for the last 50 years, but AI changes every day. So the regulatory approach has to be adaptive to that reality. So what we've done recently is, as John has mentioned, as you've mentioned, worked in the space of sort of guidelines and frameworks. And we don't see that as soft. We see that as sort of laying the foundation and the groundwork of what good looks like. So we did that with the Model Governance Framework in 2019. We updated it for Gen AI, and recently we just launched one for Agentic AI. We've also done AI Assurance Sandbox, because we do believe that while it's important to regulate for specific things like online harms, and we've done that with elections and with scams, for the rest of it, a lot of it is about trying to convince companies that there is corporate benefit and reputational benefit to doing AI well and doing AI safely. So we've worked in the space of standards to try and get a technical consensus on what good looks like. We have the AI Verify Foundation, where we've brought together demand and supply, as well as testers to kind of experiment on real-world use cases. And we've put that together in a community of testers, deployers, developers, so that we can have conversations about what good looks like and how we can move forward on that.
Okay, so now you know why Singapore is a leader in this field and why they come up. It's really impressive. Thank you so much. And by the way, if anybody wants to jump in at any point, feel free to do so. So let's move into who is responsible and how do we define responsibility when it comes to trust? And Ria, let's start with you. Give us a sense from the developer's perspective about what technical and non-technical safeguards Anthropic is including in some of your Claude models as they're being released.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Before I answer your question, I just want to quickly say how excited Anthropic is to be here in India. Just a few days ago, we opened our very first office in India, in Bangalore, and it's a really exciting moment. We see India actually using Claude as the #2 country in the entire world. So there is so much potential for growth here, and we're already excited to be able to hire a local team. About trust, that is something that Anthropic thinks very deeply about across all of our teams, including, of course, our safeguard teams and all of our security teams. There's a variety of ways that we build in trust to the stack, to everything that we do. One of those ways that I'd like to call out here today is the work that we've done on Claude's constitution. That's a really interesting document that is living and always being updated. It really provides guidelines for Claude to think about how it interacts with humans, how it comes up with its answers, and helps it resolve conflicts whenever that occurs. So the Constitution has 4 categories that it really tries to break down, not just in rules, but in explanations of how we got to those rules. So we hope that this Constitution will help Claude be safe, ethical, helpful, and compliant with our regulations. And when I say compliant, I mean around rules that we've built around jailbreaking, things like cybersecurity, queries around mental health, all of these issues that are very serious, and we need to be able to describe how Claude should come up when it faces conflicts around these issues. This constitution is used in various parts of our training, so it is really built into the core of the model. Sometimes we even colloquially refer to it as Claude's soul. And it helps prioritize whenever there are potential decisions or choices that Claude has to make about what it serves you. It's also public, so we think that's a really important part of transparency, so everyone can see exactly the way that Claude is coming up with these answers. We just released an update to the Constitution, and like I said, it's constantly being changed. The latest change is really to adapt to the agentic world, which Singapore mentioned they're working very deeply on as well.
Thanks, Ria. Tara, I mean, we can talk about constitutions, but then we can talk about financial services where you are holding people's money and their trust and their wealth. I mean, this is a key element of people's banking experiences. Talk to us a little bit about being the AI, sometimes developer, but also deployer. And what does that mean in terms of managing trust when we're thinking about transparency, auditability, ethical safeguards, all of the things that you're putting into place at JP Morgan?
Sure. Well, I think actually you said some of this earlier, Rebecca, and so did Denise. So I'll just underscore some of your remarks with respect to the importance of actually putting AI products and services in the hands of real people every day, and that being the real focus of what I think is an evolving conversation in the field about governance. Many of us, I think all of us actually up here, have been in the field for a long time and have sort of seen the field move from what we used to call principles to the direction of practice now. And I think that it's, our interest as a deployer of these technologies most often characterized is in making sure that they are inherently trustworthy, because otherwise we can't do our jobs effectively as a major financial services firm globally. So what that means for us, and I think the overlay here that I also just want to mention, I appreciate constitutional AI, and I think Anthropic's done a great job being sort of values oriented about the work that they're doing. But our company faces real regulations that we are designed to comply with every single day. We have a prudential regulatory system to which we have to be responsive in banking. There are obviously other sectors that are similarly regulated, like healthcare and pharmaceuticals, but what that looks like materially from a trust perspective translated into AI is thinking about explainability requirements in very concrete ways, which support, for example, our capability of leading an audit trail for every single model that we deploy. It looks like us having a capability of adverse action, which means that we can, we can have customers come to us and actually request reasons for having been denied a credit score, of a certain level, for example, or in an underwriting context. It allows us to place fairness very materially and legally at the center of all the work that we do deploying models in everyday contexts. And I think that I think it's really important for deployers like us to ground the conversation we're having about AI governance in these types of material impacts to real consumers in that very way. So that's a little bit of what I'd kind of describe as our focus right now.
Yeah, deep commitment to trust, and many years. We heard 80 years in India alone, right? So yeah, many years of trust and customer trust to build on. Munkol, tell us a little bit about what it's, this question between developers and deployers through the context of what's happening in Asia. There may be different dimensions with we think about the number of open models that are coming out in Asia and otherwise. Give us a sense of what that looks like.
Yeah, thank you so much. Delighted to be here and hijack the all-female panel here.
We needed you.
So we are. I'm from AI Safety Asia. We build AI governance ecosystem in Asia, mainly in Southeast Asia. So I think the conversation, as Denise pointed out, we move a little bit forward now. The conversation started a little bit vague and all of this, and now we move a little bit in Asia in particular, like with the work of Singapore. I think Singapore is leading a lot of work on all of this. We're moving a little bit that people understand that it's not just the responsibility should be a shared responsibility. Right? Developer has a responsibility, deployer has a responsibility, but also the regulator also has the responsibility. It's a shared responsibility, and we are still far away from that, but I think we're moving toward that with the work of the Verify Foundation of Singapore that's leading some of the work around that. I think everyone knows that we cannot put responsibility on just one actor, and it's a stakeholder responsibility. I think the three actors that I mentioned, just the three actors that mainly involved in that, but also there's civil society, there's citizens themselves that need to play a role in all of these ecosystems so that we create trust for the society.
Did you look at the questions ahead of time? Because we are going right into that shared responsibility question now. So thank you very much. Okay, let's talk about that. There's the notion of how you build shared responsibility across the value chain has been a topic of conversation for a long time. I'm not sure that we've gotten really to the essence of what it means. And now we're in a space where we are actively seeing these models being developed and deployed across. So let's try to dig into that a little bit and learn a little bit more. So why don't we start with you, Denise, and then we'll come to you, Tara, and to Ria. Give us a sense from, you've been doing the work around your model framework, around agentic AI. Give us a sense from your perspective of how you're thinking about shared responsibility.
I think, and it's been mentioned a few times already, it has to start with the AI supply chain and that value chain. And then I'll jump straight to the difficulties and challenges. This is a different type of technology from what we've seen, in the sense that you have the foundational model and you have wrappers and wrappers built around it. The supply chain is global, the usage is global, in a way that I think we started off with social media, but this has added on layers of complexity. Going to your point, I think we need to be very concrete in a way that the lawyers can apply. And the regulators can apply, and we haven't quite gotten there yet. We're still having, I would say, conceptual conversations about accountability. That's important, But to then move into the space of liability, causation, insurance, and assignment of that, we're still some ways away. We've done some of that work now. We're continuing to do that work. The starting point will have to be, what does good governance look like for each of these actors? Once we can concretize that, then we can get a sense of, well, if you don't do your job, what does that mean, and what should happen? So it's a known regulatory conversation. It's just that this technology moves quickly, but we'll have to stick to those established principles of coming up with legal frameworks, and we have to do that internationally in a coordinated manner so that fragmentation has been mentioned. I don't think we can do this if everyone has the conversation separately and in silos.
I couldn't agree more with Denise. And I think what I'd add is that I think governance means a lot of different things, especially these days, depending on what context you are operating in. But I think we have to sort of draw back and consider it from a holistic perspective. What I mean by that is to say that it's going to take action of a number of different stripes and at different levels of the ecosystem, the supply chain that Denise is talking about, in order for us to effectively do the type of thing that she's describing. And I think it starts with voluntary commitments by tech companies. And I think a lot of the work that the Partnership in AI is leading in terms of a verification ecosystem and really driving best practice in the field, really shaping what the principal levels conversation should look like amidst a whole host of other civil society and other institutional actors is really, really key there. I think there's a layer of technical standards generation that really needs to be paid attention to as well. And so at JP Morgan Chase, for example, we're really leaning in, not just on the first part of that stripe that I mentioned with the partnership and other partners, but in that kind of second layer of standards generation, because that's really critical to feeding what ultimately ends up impacting regulatory guidance actuated by governments and regulators, which I would say is kind of the third layer of governance and ultimately the most accountable part of that kind of work stream, because it is a set of legal requirements ultimately that gets codified into law or regulation. I think depending on the country in which we're operating, we're at different parts of that maturity stack, but I think it's all kind of being progressed in the ways that it can be right now by an ecosystem of actors. And I think that last point is also a really important point for us to make, which is, again, speaking to Denise's point raised about the supply chain, really, really critical here. And I think we've all echoed points related to that this morning. But this is not just about frontier model developers. This is about tooling providers. This is about end users like us, supplying products and services to citizens and customers. It's also about cloud service providers and infrastructure. And so I think the more we can kind of open the aperture to really think comprehensively about these questions, the better.
Yeah, and as mentioned, Anthropic has joined a number of partnerships and commitments itself. Just recently at Munich Security Conference, we signed one with Microsoft and Ericsson and other companies to be committed to a trusted tech stack. So these are really powerful commitments, I think, especially coming from industry themselves. But maybe I'll give a technical example of how we're building trust into the process and then sharing it. Model Context Protocol, MCP, is a technical standard for connecting chat bots to tools and data that make it much more useful. Even the most advanced chatbot is really nothing if it's not connected to things that is useful for you and builds a context for how you're trying to actually use it. So we released this in 2024, really before agentic AI was in the modern area, but it's looking forward to ways that people can securely connect to tools. We were really excited to see there was great uptake of this. As of now, pretty much everyone is using it. If you use ChatGPT, Cowork, you're going to be connecting to all your tools through MCP. And as we saw this uptake, we ensured that this was completely open source. And actually, just a few weeks ago, we handed off ownership of MCP to the Linux Foundation, ensuring that it was useful for everyone and not just one company, because it's become such a great standard for everyone to use and feel confident that their data is secure. So I think this is just one way that developers can build trust and then share it with the entire ecosystem.
Thanks very much, Ria. Okay, let's turn to a piece of this question around adoption, which is really thinking through what are we seeing in the global south, appreciating that is an extremely diverse set of countries and cultures and languages and all sorts of different adoption models. Mungol, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing, maybe particularly from the government side with regard to supporting different levels of adoption across different countries.
Yeah, I mean, the good things about Global South is that the trust on technology and AI is usually higher than the Global North. But we should not take it for granted because something happened, trust can be eroded very quickly. Right? My concern is that government are not, or deployer themselves are not ready in terms of understanding and adopting this technology in a safe way. Right? There's an institutional assurance that need to be built in the developer themselves and also in the government. There's lack of capacity across different jurisdictions. In Asia alone, there is Asia is 60% of the world, and that's all the deployment of the technology will be stress tested in Asia. Right? All the things that are developing in the Bay Area will be stress tested here, and the people will have the live experience on what's happening, whether it's incident, whether it's good or bad. So we need to making sure that there's an institutional assurance if we want AI to be assured in Asia, and Asia has to lead the way in that. So when we talk with the government, what we are trying to convey the message is that you don't need, not every country need to build the frontier model. And when we talk about sovereignty, it's about control, right? What are the procurement checklists? What are the monitoring mechanisms? What are the evaluation? How do you enforce the accountability and transparency across the value chain? So that's the sovereignty. That's the control that you can do, and not just about building everything from the full stack of AI.
Okay, so the sovereignty word has come up, which I think every panel has touched on. So let's integrate that into some of our discussion about the Global South. Denise, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, that you lead and work with your partners in at Singapore, is one aspect of a regional group that is coming together to think through some of these questions around AI adoption and grassroots deployment. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, happy to. Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, is a very diverse group of 11 countries. Economically heterogeneous, socially, culturally, very different across the countries. Cambodia is a member. And the work that we've been doing in leading the working group on AI within ASEAN has been really about understanding the local context, but still trying to find commonalities across. And that's been a big theme for the grouping. It's about what does inclusion mean in your context? What does localization mean and representation mean in your context? So respecting those sovereign aspects of the country, but working together to find a common platform, because businesses will have to operate across. People do have to move across, and the technology will be transcending across. The data will be moving across. And so finding those common principles, uplifting the understanding, but still ensuring that local context and representation is respected has been very important. So we've been doing a lot of work in multilingual and multicultural context within models on the technical side, and on the sort of governmental policy side, it's been about putting out frameworks that everyone can agree on, that governments can have conversations and dialogues about. Again, still ongoing work starting points, but we'll continue to do more of that to kind of strengthen the regional understanding and consensus around that, but still bearing in mind that broader global conversation that is quite critical.
And so much of it is just about creating the space for those conversations to take place, right? So that one can better understand the different contexts from which people are coming. Ria, talk to us a little bit. You mentioned India, a little bit about your work here. Talk us a little about some of the other countries you may be. And also, I think this question of multilingual, I think would be interesting to hear from your perspective as well.
This is a really exciting year for Anthropic. This is pretty much the year that we're going international. So this is one of the first, for us, international offices that we're opening in India. And yes, we just announced a new model launch, and we were very excited to do some testing on Indic languages, and it's our best model so far on Indic languages. And in general, testing on languages and improving their performance is a really big focus for us, especially during this year when we're trying to go international. It's not just that, but it's being able to have benchmarks that are relevant for the culture. And so we're working with many organizations that are on the ground here in India to ensure that we're actually meeting the needs of its users and trying to determine how that is different and has the correct context from what we're used to in the United States. India really is a model for us of how we build these partnerships, working with the government, working with NGOs, and it's very exciting because of all the enthusiasm, as you mentioned, in this region for enacting AI across various use cases. We're really excited to see how it's used in agriculture, in healthcare, in industry, and there's unique trust needs for all of those industries. So we're working together really to make it happen.
Great. And did you want to touch on any of your work in any other countries, or just specifically on India? Or
well, we really
else?
haven't announced too many launches, more to come, but we've opened in Japan. That's one of our main hubs in APAC, and we have a few offices in Europe. But I think by the end of the year, I'll be able to have a much more interesting conversation with you all.
Okay, just wondered if we could get a sneak peek, if there was anything coming up. Great, thank you very much. So Tara, maybe you can talk a little bit about the work you're doing at JP Morgan Chase. And I also think we're sort of the flip side of the question is, you know, what are and how are you supporting your workers here to be upskilled and to better understand how these models are working and how they're integrating into your banking practices and operations?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think maybe just a zoom out for one moment. JP Morgan Chase is a global bank. Obviously, we operate in over 100 countries in the world. And I think one key aspect of our work globally is just being intensely customer focused, because as a deployer, delivering to end users every day, we have to be. It's part of our imperative. So, and I think the trust piece really comes into play there, as we talked about earlier. Because we deploy in countries different financial services and products, we have to tailor them to any given market. And so that sort of sensitivity, the focus on listening, multi-stakeholderism that Denise mentioned, cooperation with local governments and regulators is just inherently a part of our kind of day-to-day prioritization of kind of more localized focus and activities. I think to speak to your question about our workforce, as John said earlier, this is our second largest hub of employees outside of the continental United States. So it's a really, really important market for us here in India. Most of our corporate philanthropy investments in India have been focused on workforce upskilling and support for training here. We have a huge tech hub, and I think the point to emphasize or re-emphasize that John mentioned earlier is that this isn't just back office operations for us. This is really like critical leading technology provision in India, and the talent here supports it accordingly. So I think that aspect is really key, and there's a huge focus on the kind of work that's happening coming out of Silicon Valley these days, but there are huge talent hubs that are really driving the AI revolution in other places, and I think just recognizing the role that India has played and the conversations that we're all here celebrating and talking about, the kind of addressing the current moment is really important too.
Absolutely. Great. Okay, I think we have a few minutes to open up for some questions from the audience. Do we have a microphone? Anybody assisting us with a microphone? There we go. She's going to help us out. Give us 1 second. There we go. Okay. So we have some questions in the front. Why don't we take 2 or 3 questions, and then the panel can respond, and we'll go from there.
So my question is to, I think, Ria and Dr. Siren can also come in. So when we look at trust is often in a spectrum. Trust and vulnerabilities for an educated person might be very different from a farmer. So how do you solve for that spectrum of trust when you are creating models, let's say, for a farmer? because the model gets trained on multiple variables. I might be a farmer who might be in a very good weather or a climate, but my soil might not be as fertile. So how do you embed a trust? And this might be, like Cloud has said, that they have a constitution. So how can you enforce these compliance by design and solve for that different spectrum of vulnerability? So how can these models be trained that way?
Great, thanks. So our first question is trust by design. Can you pass the microphone on to this gentleman, and then we'll come back to you.
Myself, Pramod. My question is to Ria. So you said multilingual implementation of agentic AI solutions. So in India, a lot of languages are there. So are you considering all the languages? Because a lot of people, they don't know English, but they need to read. They use AI, but we need to make sure that they understand that language. So are you considering implementation of all the Indian languages, or how that?
Okay, all the Indian languages are not. And then we're coming back to this woman here. She had her hand up in the second row.
Hi, I'm Fernanda from the Internet Lab think tank in Brazil. Denise mentioned gathering a community of testers, and I would like to know more about how does it work, methodologies for that, and if anyone can comment on the role of open source in building trust.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have trust by design, we have languages, and we have open source and testing community. Who would like to go first? We'll start with you. Why don't we start at the far end, and then we'll get to Chloe. Okay.
Yeah, so I can start. I think in some way you've already answered your own question, right? It's by design. Right? You have to start involving the user when you start designing this model, right? And then it's different layer of assurance. How would that trust is built, right? The user themselves will probably need to empower them with the new education on understanding what does trust mean, what is privacy, and all of these. Sometimes the user will need to understand the spectrum of trust. And then you already answered your question that trust is a spectrum, right? So we need to understand what are the different layer of trust, what are the nuance. And then there's different actor in the whole ecosystem, from the model developer, from the deployer, and then from the regulator, right, in terms of enforcement and all of these, and civil society as well, that help in terms of being the angel of the society to help monitoring what trust mean and what are the verifiable, what are the redress mechanism around that.
Okay, great. Ria?
Yeah, absolutely everything that was just said, and I'll share, a specific example. I mentioned the Claude Constitution is built to ensure that we stay by our guidelines, and those guidelines are always changing and adapting to what local needs are. Here in India, actually, I love the example of agriculture because we're partnering with XSTEP and NGO to build agriculture benchmarks specific for India. So it does need to be local. Another example from the United States is mental health, which has been raised to us as a big problem with chatbots. And so we've come up with new guidelines for when queries are indicating if there is a mental health issue that we should serve information from a web search about, for example. And then on the flip side, we're also looking at the technical aspects that bring this risk, maybe things like sycophancy, and how can we tone that down. And so those are just two examples of how we're building more trust based on local issues that we're seeing evolve currently.
Great, thanks. Tara, or do you want to jump in? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think on this question in particular, I want to bring use cases into the lens view here, because I think trust and accountability by design is really, really key in contextual relationship to the way in which AI is being deployed. And so I'll sound like a broken record a bit as the deployer on the panel talking about, our financial service use cases, but I think that applying the lens of localization that we describe, or locality, and then exactly how you're using technology, who it's serving, and for what purpose is really key. So that's just what I'd add.
Thank you.
Just quickly answering the question, 30 seconds on the AI Verify Foundation. It's an open source foundation based in Singapore, but membership is global. It's got frameworks, it's got tools, and the tools are connected to benchmarks. It's all open source, so you can it's a reference architecture you can take and use to really sort of test real world systems. But I also wanted to mention the AI Assurance Sandbox that's part of the foundation. And that's not a regulatory sandbox. It's about matching real-world deployers and their use cases with testers from around the world. and the testers will kind of work with the deployers to figure out what they worry about and what's the best method to test that. The reports are then, we don't look at whether your model is good or bad, we don't really care about that for now. But we care about the methodology that you used and the testing sort of protocols that you used. All of that comes out in a report, again, all open sourced and used. And so in that way, it's really almost a community of practice, completely global, completely open, so that we can have conversations about what good testing of AI systems looks like.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in. There's risk with all models, whether they are open sourced models or they are closed models. There's differential risk and differential potential impacts. We at the Partnership on AI believe fundamentally that there is a real role for open model development in terms of driving innovation and competition. And in fact, some of the work that we have done on characterizing and articulating the value chain has only been possible because we've had open source models that have allowed us to do that. So I really think we have to have a very nuanced, and it comes right back to the point that Tara made around use cases, right? There's levels of risk with the models, but there's also risk around the use cases as well. Okay, you have 30 seconds if you want to jump in.
So I want to acknowledge the question around diversity of the language, right? It's a requirement. Like India has thousands of languages. Southeast Asia alone has more than 1,000 languages. So it's not, it's a misleading if we say that we only build for English, right? The system will fail if you don't treat all the languages. It's a requirement. It's not an additional inclusion add-on. It's a requirement that we have to work. Everything has to work for all the languages.
Fantastic. Okay, we have a lightning round, and then we are concluding in time. I'm afraid we don't have time for any more questions. What? We still have time. What, in your perspective across each member, is the most critical enabler in this moment? What we've tried to do in this panel is get underneath the theoretical to the actionable, as John charged us with as we begin. What do you think is one of the most critical enablers of making that happen and moving that forward?
Inclusion, representation, but in a very sort of trusted way.
I think the shared accountability model we've all spoken to needs to be clarified and made explicit, and there needs to be transparency between actors who are sharing in that supply chain that Denise spoke to.
100%.
Well, representing a frontier lab, it's transparency, sharing how we're thinking about things, sharing how we develop our principles, and making partnerships where that is open source.
Representing civil society, I think it's about verifiability. How we can verify that everything will work, everything is transparent, and how can we do that on a larger scale?
Wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you. Please join me in thanking the speakers that we have with us today.
Good morning, everybody. I'll just briefly take up this